The winter of 1817 came late and hard to Eldermere, the narrow brick house in Hertfordshire that had been grand within living memory and was now measured only in the things it no longer had. It had no fires in the front rooms after 4 o'clock. It had no second footman, no carriage horses that were truly its own, and no mistress willing to say aloud that the family was poor. What Eldermere had instead was Honora Blake, 24 when she came to it, and 26 now, an orphaned gentlewoman taken in by her aunt out of a duty that was reminded to her daily, and reminded again on the morning the invitation came. "You will come to Lady Harrow's ball, of course," said her aunt, Mrs. Lavinia Sowerby, reading the card as though it had been addressed to her alone. "Someone must carry Arabella's shawl and see to her hem. You do not imagine you are being asked to dance?" "No, Aunt," Honora said. "I did not imagine it." "Good. There is nothing so tiresome as a poor relation who forgets her place. You may wear the gray." The gray? There was only the gray, a plain dove-colored gown that had been turned once and mended twice, a neat pale seam running the inside of one sleeve and another along the hem where the cloth had worn thin as paper. Honora had done the mending herself, small, even stitches by candle end, and she was not ashamed of it. A mended thing was a thing that had been cared for. She told herself this while Arabella, golden and lovely and 19, was laced into rose silk before the only long glass in the house. "You might at least look glad for me," Arabella said to the glass. "I am glad for you," said Honora, and meant it, which was the strange thing her aunt had never understood about her. They went up to town for the season. Lady Harrow's rooms on the night of the ball were lit as though the family kept the sun in the cellar and let it out only for parties, a full blaze of chandelier and candelabra, gilt and honey-colored stone, and Honora stood at the edge of it holding a shawl she was not permitted to set down. It was on the terrace, before ever she went in, that the first true thing of the night happened, though she did not know it mattered. An old footman had caught his livery on the iron scroll of the terrace rail, and the seam of his coat had gone at the shoulder, a long, ugly tear that would be seen the moment he carried in a tray. He was past 60, and his hands shook when he looked at it. "They will turn me off for it," he said, to no one, to the cold air. "Shabby," they'll say. "Can't have a shabby man in the hall." "You will not be turned off," Honora said. "Hold still, Barnaby. I have a needle in my reticule, I always do. Turn to the light." She knelt on the cold stone in her gray gown and mended a servant's coat by the terrace lamp while the great house roared behind her, and she did it quickly and well, and thought nothing of it. What she did not see was the man standing in the dark of the doorway above her, fair-haired, in a midnight blue coat, who had come out for air away from the noise and the mothers, and who watched the whole small thing without moving. He was Julian, Duke of Renfield, and he had not opened a ball, nor asked any woman to dance, since his mother had died 6 years before. He went back inside before she rose, but he stopped the hostess in the passage. "Lady Harrow," he said, "the girl on the terrace, in the gray. Who is she? The gray?" Lady Harrow blinked. "That will be the Sowerby girl's cousin. A poor relation, your grace, nobody at all. Shall I have her sent away from the doors?" "No," the Duke said. "Send me her name in writing. Tonight I find I should like to have it." Lady Harrow thought him strange, and wrote it out, and thought no more of it. That note, dated in Lady Harrow's own hand, would matter more than anything else in Honora's life, and neither of them knew it yet. Inside, an hour on, the thing was done to her that her aunt had planned from the moment the invitation came. Mrs. Sowerby drew Honora out of the shadow by the wall and into the bright center of the floor, where the fine lady stood, and said in a carrying voice pitched to be heard, Come, come, do not hide. Let them see you. Is it not a wonder what a girl can do with a needle when she has nothing else? Look, look how she has mended it. Twice. She turned Honora by the shoulder, so the lamplight fell full on the worn seams, on the pale threads at the hem, on every honest stitch, and she laughed, and because she laughed the ladies laughed, one behind her fan, one leaning to whisper. And then the laughter ran round the room as fire runs along a spilled thing, and Honora stood in the middle of it in her twice-mended gray, and did not weep, and did not run, only folded her hands, the thumb pressed flat, so that no one would know what it cost her. And into the dying edge of that laughter, before it had quite finished, a man crossed the floor. The room felt him move before it saw him. The Duke walked through the fine ladies as though they were furniture, straight to the girl in gray, and he bowed to her, a full bow. The bow a man gives the highest lady in the room, and he held out his gloved hand. Miss Blake, he said, and his voice was quiet and it carried to the walls. Will you give me the first dance? The first dance, the precedence of a duchess, the honor that belonged by right to the greatest lady present, offered in front of the whole assembled county to the mocked girl in the mended dress. The laughter did not fade. It stopped, all at once, as if a hand had been laid over the mouth of the room. Somewhere a fan clicked shut. Mrs. Sowerby's face went from triumph to something else entirely, her hand rising to her chest. Honora looked at the hand held out to her and did not understand it. Your Grace, she said, I think you have mistaken me for someone else. I have not, the Duke said. I have not mistaken you at all. Your hand, Miss Blake. She put her hand into his because there was nothing else in the world to do, and he led her out, and the music began because Lady Harrow, staring, signaled that it should, and the Duke, who had not danced in 6 years, opened the ball with a poor relation in a twice-mended gown, while the whole county watched and could not look away. He said very little as they danced. Once he said, You mend a torn coat, as though the man inside it mattered. And Honora, who did not know he had seen, only said, He does matter. And the Duke's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile and was gone. When the dance ended, he bowed again and gave her back to the edge of the room, and by then everything had changed and nothing had. And she still did not know why any of it had happened. What she learned in the days after was that a thing seen by everyone cannot be undone by anyone. The county could talk of nothing else. Who was she? The gray girl the Duke had chosen? Mrs. Sowerby could not now send her home in disgrace, for to send her home would be to confess before all the world that she had staged the mockery and been answered by a Duke, and so, gnashing, she was forced to keep Honora and drag her out night after night, dressed still in the gray, because there was no money for better, and because, Mrs. Sowerby said through her teeth, The Duke seems to like you shabby. Let him have you shabby. Honora was on display now, bound to the season she had come only to serve at, and she went where she was taken, calm and upright, and waited to understand. She did not have to wait long to see the Duke again, for he began, quietly, to be wherever she was. At the Fentons' musical evening he crossed a crowded room to stand beside her chair. You are not singing, he observed. I have not been asked to, Your Grace. I turn the pages. Miss Sowerby sings. Then turn mine, he said, and sat, absurdly, a Duke, at the second pianoforte where no one was playing, so that she was obliged to stand near him and turn a page that did not need turning, and for a quarter of an hour they spoke of nothing, and it was the best quarter of an hour she had had in years. He asked her, once, Do you never grow tired of being useful to people who are unkind to you? They are not always unkind, she said, and I would rather be useful than ornamental. An ornament may be put away in a drawer. No one puts away the person who keeps the accounts. Do you keep the accounts? I keep Arabella's, and my aunt's, and the household's. Someone must, or Eldermere would have been sold over their heads 3 winters ago. He was quiet a moment. You saved the house that despises you. I saved a house I once was happy in, she said. The despising is separate. The Duke looked at her then in a way she felt but did not name, and said nothing, and the wanting he did not speak of sat between them like a third person at the instrument. He found her again at the lending library, to which she had been sent to change her cousin's novels, and he pretended to be surprised, and was not. He found her at the print shop window, and at the Sunday service, and once in the cold gallery of a house they had both been invited to, where he came and stood close enough that she had to lift her chin to look at him, close enough that she felt the warmth of him, and neither moved to close the last small distance, and neither of them stepped back. You wish to ask me something, she said at last, and you do not ask it. I do, he said, and I will not. Not yet. Why not? Because you would not believe the answer yet, said the Duke, and I find I want you to believe it more than I want to say it. And that was all he would give her, and it was a great deal, and she carried it home in her chest all the long dark ride. He came to dine, some nights later, at a house where Honora had been asked only because the Duke's odd interest had made her a curiosity worth having at a table, and where she was seated, pointedly, below the salt among the poor cousins and the deaf old clergyman, while Arabella glittered near the head. The Duke was placed in the seat of honor, and he spent the first 2 courses answering the hostess in the fewest civil words a duke may use, and looking down the long board at the woman in gray. When the ladies had withdrawn and returned, and the company broke into the easy clusters of the evening, he crossed the room and sat, without asking, in the empty chair beside her. You are frowning at your coffee, Your Grace, Honora said. It has done nothing to you. I am frowning, he said, at a table that seats you below a clergyman who cannot hear the salt passed, and above no one at all. It is where I belong, by the rules that seat tables. Then the rules that seat tables are foolish, and I have long thought so, and tonight I am sure of it. You must not say such things aloud, she said low. You will make my position worse. When you single me out, my aunt does not grow kinder. She grows careful, and careful is more dangerous than cruel. He looked at her with a sharpened attention. You are afraid of her. I am wary of her. There is a difference, and I have had years to learn it. A person who is merely cruel strikes when she is angry, and you may see the blow coming. A person who is careful waits, and smiles, and strikes when you have forgotten to guard. My aunt has begun to smile at me, Your Grace. That is what frightens me, if you would have the true word for it. The Duke was quiet a moment. Then let me stand between you and the careful blow. You cannot stand between a woman and her own household, Honora said gently. No one can. I must stand there myself. But I will tell you this, and it is more than I have told anyone. It is a great deal easier to stand, knowing someone in the room would mind if I fell. And she rose, before he could answer, and went to fetch her aunt's shawl, because that was still, whatever else was true, her office. He saw for himself the shape of her days not long after, for he called at the Sowerby house on a pretext so thin the footman scarcely troubled to believe it, and was shown into a parlor where he was not expected, and found the Duchess that would be at a small desk in the corner, with a household ledger open before her, and a pen in her hand, adding a long column, while Arabella lay upon the sofa, reading a novel, and complaining of the light. Do not stop on my account, the Duke said, when Honora made to rise. Finish your column. A sum interrupted is a sum done twice. So he sat, a duke, in a shabby parlor, and watched a woman balance the accounts of the people who despised her, and he watched the sure small movements of her pen, and how she carried a figure in her head while she wrote another, and never faltered, and never blotted. And he found the watching of it did something to him that no ballroom full of accomplished girls had ever done. "There," Honora said at last, and set down the pen and shook the sand from the page. "It balances. It always balances when someone is honest with it. And is someone always honest with it?" "I am," she said simply. "Whatever else is said of me in this house, no one has ever said the books did not balance. It is the one thing they cannot take from me. So I keep it very carefully. It is not the only thing about you that cannot be taken," the Duke said. And the words hung in the shabby room brighter than any candle, and Arabella, on the sofa, lowered her novel and looked, and began from that hour to hate her cousin in a new and colder way. There was one person in London who took Honora's part before she had said a word to her, and that was the Duke's great aunt, the Dowager Marchioness of Thorn, a small, fierce old woman named Beatrix, who had known his mother and buried most of her own friends and no longer troubled to be polite to anyone she did not respect. She sent for Honora one afternoon by a footman with orders not to accept a refusal, and Mrs. Sowerby, who would have crawled over glass for a marchioness's notice, was made frantic that the summons was for the poor relation and not for her. "Sit down, girl," said Lady Thorne, when Honora was shown in. "Not there. There, where I can see your face." They said you were plain." "You are not plain. You have a face that keeps its own counsel, which is worth 10 pretty ones. Now my great-nephew has danced with you, and stood at pianofortes for you, and made a spectacle of himself, and I want to know what you have done to him." "Nothing, my lady. I have done nothing at all." "That," said the old woman, "is precisely what I hoped you would say. Every other girl who has ever come near him has done a great deal, and it has never once worked. Do you know why he stopped dancing?" "I know his mother died, my lady. I know it was 6 years ago. I know no more than the county knows." Lady Thorne looked at her a long moment. "His mother," she said, "was the kindest creature God ever made, and the most invisible. The Lords forgot her the day she was buried. Do you know who remembers her? The servants. The old woman who kept the still room. The man who drove her carriage 40 years. They remember her because she saw them. My great-nephew has spent 6 years among people who remembered her rank and forgot her heart, and it made him cold, and I could not reach him. And then he saw a girl kneel on a terrace and mend a footman's coat so the old fool would not be turned off." She stopped. "Ah, you did not know he had seen that?" Honora had gone very still. "No, my lady," she said. "I did not know anyone had seen it." "Well," said Lady Thorne, satisfied, and rang for tea. Someone did. They sat a while with the tea between them. And the old woman studied her over the rim of the cup. "You do not ask me what I want of you," Lady Thorne said. "Every other girl would be angling by now for a hint of his fortune, his intentions, whether I mean to help her. You only drink your tea and wait. Why?" "Because you did not send for me to be asked things," Honora said. "You sent for me to look at me. I have been looked at by a great many people this season. I have learned to sit still under it. And does it not tire you, all the looking?" "It tires me," Honora admitted, "but it does not frighten me any longer. A woman who has nothing has one freedom the rich do not. There is very little left that can be taken from her. They took my consequence years ago. They cannot take it twice." "They will try," said Lady Thorne, and set down her cup with a small, sharp click. Understand me, child. You have wandered into a place where a great prize is suddenly in question, and people who feel a prize slipping do ugly things. Your aunt has the look of a woman who is not finished. When she moves, she will move where everyone can see. Because a public wound is the one kind that does not heal quietly. So I will give you one instruction, and you will follow it, or you will lose him. When the blow comes, do not defend yourself. Not a word. Stand and be silent, and trust that someone in the room loves you enough to have prepared the answer. Can you do a hard thing like that? I have done nothing but hard things, Honora said, for 6 years. I can do one more. Good girl, said Lady Thorne, and for the first time the fierce old face softened completely. Then we shall do very well together, you and I. Now finish your tea and let an old woman look at you a little longer. It has been a long time since I had anything in this house worth looking at. It changed nothing on the surface of Honora's days, and everything underneath them. She understood now that the Duke's regard was not a whim and not a jest, and she was careful not to build upon it, for she had kept accounts too long to spend money she did not hold. But when next he found her, at a card party at which she had been set to fetch and carry, she looked at him differently. And he saw that she did. My great-aunt has spoken to you, he said. She has. She told me a great deal you did not. She has always been better at saying true things than I am, the Duke said. It is a fault I mean to correct. You told me once I would not believe your answer, Honora said. Tell me one true thing now, and let me decide whether I believe it. He was quiet, weighing it. Then he said, The people who flatter me speak of my mother's rank. You are the only person in 6 years who has spoken to me of her kindness as a thing that mattered more, and did not know it was the one thing I needed to hear. That is a true thing. Do you believe it? Yes, she said, surprising herself. I believe that one. Good, he said. There are others. I am keeping them, and his hand lifted, just slightly, toward her cheek, and stopped in the air a hand's breadth away, and hung there while both of them forgot to breathe, and then he lowered it, deliberately, and stepped back, and the not touching was louder than any touch could have been. But not everyone at the card party had been playing cards. Across the room, Arabella watched the Duke's hand lift toward her cousin's face and stop, and her own face, so lovely, went white, and then hard. And beside her Mrs. Sowerby watched too, and understood at last that the thing she had meant as a cruelty had become a courtship, and that the poor relation she had brought to town to hold a shawl was going to be a duchess. And something in her broke, very quietly, and turned to poison. We shall see, Mrs. Sowerby said, under her breath, to no one, as she had once said other things on other terraces. We shall see about that. If you have found some quiet comfort in Honora's story so far, do take a moment to subscribe and walk the rest of these evenings with us. It costs you nothing. And it lets stories like this one find the people who need them. And what the poison did was this. Mrs. Sowerby understood one thing about the county with perfect clarity. It had loved the story of the Duke choosing the Grey Girl, and it would love just as well the story of the Grey Girl proved a fraud. A thing given may be taken back. And a crowd that had gasped for Honora would gasp twice as loud to learn she had earned nothing, arranged everything, and made fools of them all. What was wanted was proof, and proof Mrs. Sowerby had come to believe was only a thing not yet written. You cannot mean it, said Arabella, when her mother told her the plan behind the closed door of the townhouse parlor. A forged letter. Mamma, that is a crime. It is a kindness, said Mrs. Sowerby, to the Duke, who is being trapped, to the county, which is being deceived, and to you, my love, who ought to have had him, and would have, but for her. Now you have her hand better than she has it herself. You have copied her ledgers for a 12-month when you were too idle to do your own. Sit, and Arabella, who was weak in the particular way that beautiful and idle people are weak, and who had watched the Duke's hand rise toward her cousin's cheek, sat and practiced. She practiced Honora's small even hand on sheet after sheet, its lean, its closed R, its looped G, and when she had it she wrote out the letter her mother dictated. A letter from Honora Blake to a matchmaker of the shabbier sort, one Mrs. Peel, who arranged introductions for a fee and asked no questions. In the letter Honora begged Mrs. Peel to contrive an accident, a public humiliation at Lady Harrow's ball, staged so as to draw a great man's pity, and named the Duke, and promised payment out of the marriage settlement when the great man was safely caught. There, said Mrs. Sowerby, reading it over. That is her voice exactly. She has hanged herself in her own writing. And Mrs. Peel? Arabella asked. She will say, she never had it. Mrs. Peel, said her mother, has been paid to say she did. She will produce it at the final assembly, weeping, a poor woman's conscience overcome, and she will read it aloud before the whole ton, and the Duke will see the woman he has made a spectacle of himself over is a schemer of the lowest sort, and he will drop her, and it will be done. And the same night Lord Ashwell means to announce for you. The county will have its 2 stories in one evening. It will be spoken of for years. Honora knew none of this, but she felt the change in the house as one feels a storm before it is seen, in the pressure of it, in how her aunt had begun to look at her almost gently. It frightened her more than the old cruelty had. And on the morning of the day before the final assembly, she learned the shape of what was coming, though not yet its whole face. She had gone down early and overheard her aunt with the housekeeper. The small trunk, Mrs. Sowerby was saying. Only the small one. She will not need more where she is going. The situation in Yorkshire is arranged. A Mrs. Bell wants a girl to mind 3 children and keep her books, and she is not particular. The mail leaves at dawn the morning after the assembly. Miss Blake will be on it. Honora stood in the cold passage with her hand against the wall. So, that was it. She was to be got out of the way, quietly, the day after some public thing she could not yet understand, sent north to be a servant in fact where she had been a servant in all but name. She had one day. And she did not yet know what she was accused of, or by whom, only that the trap had already closed, and she was standing inside it. She did the only thing she had ever done in trouble, which was to be useful and to watch. She went, that afternoon, to see Lady Thorne. Because the old woman had said true things once and might again. You look, said Lady Thorne, like a girl who has heard the dogs and not yet seen the hunt. Sit, tell me. I am to be sent to Yorkshire the morning after the assembly, Honora said, as a governess. My trunk is being packed, and there is something planned for the assembly itself. My aunt has been gentle with me, which she has never been. And gentleness in her is the surest sign of harm. I cannot say what it is, but it will happen in front of everyone, and it is meant to end me. The old woman's eyes had gone very bright and very hard. In front of everyone, she repeated, Of course. They will not merely dismiss you. They will unmake you, publicly, in the same room he chose you in, so the story runs backward. That is how it is done. She was silent a moment, thinking, and then she said, Then we shall be in that room too, child, and we shall bring what we bring. Go home. Be seen to weep if you can manage it. Let them think you cowed. and leave the rest to an old woman who has buried cleverer villains than your aunt. My lady, I cannot guess what they mean to use." "No," said Lady Thorne. "But I begin to know what we shall answer with. Go." The Duke found her once more before the assembly, on the eve of it, in the cold garden of a house where they had both been dragged to cards. He had seen the change in her, the new stillness, and it worried him. "Something is coming," he said, without preamble. "You have the look of a woman who has read the last page and will not tell me how it ends. What is it, Honora?" It was the first time he had used her name, and it went through her like warmth through cold hands, and she nearly told him everything: the trunk, the mail at dawn, the something planned. But Lady Thorne's words held her. Be seen to weep. Let them think you cowed. Leave the rest to an old woman. If she warned him, he would act, and act openly. And a duke acting openly would only harden her aunt to cleverer work. The trap had to be allowed to spring where it could be caught. "Something is coming," she agreed. "I know its shape, but not its face. And I am asking you to trust me for one more day, and to trust your great aunt, who has more of the face of it than I do. Whatever is said of me tomorrow night, your grace, however it is said, and by whom, do not answer it until Lady Thorne has spoken. Will you promise me that? You are asking me to stand still while you are struck. I am asking you to let the blow land where we can all see it, so that this time it cannot be denied. A thing done in the dark can be argued forever. A thing done in the light, and answered in the light, is finished." She looked up at him. "I have spent my life being useful. Let me be clever, once, and let it cost me a bad hour to buy a good end." He was silent, and the cold garden was silent, and then he lifted his hand, and this time he did not stop it a breath away. He laid it, very lightly, along the line of her jaw. The first time in all the season he had truly touched her. And it was nothing, and it was everything. "One day," he said. "I will hold my tongue for one day and one bad hour. But understand me, Honora Blake. It is the last hour I will ever let anyone in that county lift a hand against you and go unanswered. After tomorrow you are mine to stand beside, and I do not stand still. After tomorrow," she said, and did not step back from his hand, and let herself believe, for one held breath, that there would be an after. Then she went in to fetch the shawl, because she was not a duchess yet. And the season had one cruel night left to run. The season's final assembly was the grandest night of the year, and Lady Harrow's rooms blazed brighter than they had at the ball where it all began, every candle lit, the long floor a sheet of gold, the whole county packed shoulder to shoulder, because word had gone quietly round that something was to happen. And a crowd will always come to watch a fall. Honora was brought in the gray, her aunt's hand light and false upon her arm. Arabella walked ahead in white, and Lord Ashwell hovered at her side, and Mrs. Sowerby's eyes went everywhere at once, counting her audience. The Duke was there, fair head above the crowd, midnight blue coat. And he looked for Honora the moment she entered, and did not stop looking, and she took what strength she could from it, and kept her chin level. It began as such things begin, with a hush that someone makes on purpose. Mrs. Sowerby drew a weeping woman forward into the light, a thin drab woman wringing a handkerchief, and raised her voice to the room. "My friends, I am the unhappiest of women, for I must speak a truth that shames my own house. This is Mrs. Peel. She has come to me in an agony of conscience, and what she carries you must all hear. For you were all deceived, and none more cruelly than His Grace the Duke himself." The room leaned in. The Duke did not move. "Tell them," said Mrs. Sowerby. "Read it." and Mrs. Peel, sniffling, unfolded a letter and read it aloud in a quavering voice. The letter in Honora's small, even hand, begging her to arrange an accident. A public shaming at Lady Harrow's ball. A humiliation contrived to catch a great man's pity. The Duke named. Payment promised from the settlement. She read it to the end, and the room made the sound a room makes. A long, low gasp that turns at its edges to anger, and every eye came round to Honora standing in her grey. "So you see, Mrs.," Sowerby said, trembling with the pleasure of it. She arranged her own mockery to trap him. The mended gown, the kneeling, the terrace, all of it staged. She is no wronged innocent. She is the cleverest schemer this county has ever housed, and she has made fools of us all. And worst of you, your grace, who honored her. Honora did not crumble. She had promised herself she would not, and she did not. She looked at the letter in Mrs. Peel's hand, and then at the room, and she said, in a voice that was not loud but carried to the walls, "I did not write that letter. I have never in my life sent a line to any matchmaker. I did not know the Duke's name a week before he spoke it. But I have learned that a thing said before enough people becomes true, whether it happened or not, so I will not waste your evening protesting. I will only say that I did not write it, and let those who know my hand and my heart weigh my word against a paper." "Prettily said, Mrs.," Sowerby cried. "But here is the paper, in her own hand. And words are cheap, and paper does not lie." "No," said a new voice, dry and old and utterly unafraid, and the Dowager Marchioness of Thorn came forward through the parting crowd with her stick and her fierce small face. "Paper does not lie. But people write paper, and people most certainly do. Lady Harrow, you have a thing of mine in your keeping. Fetch it now, if you please." Lady Harrow, who had been let into the secret that afternoon and had not slept for the joy of her part in it, came forward with a folded note. "I have, my lady," she said, and turned to the room. "My friends, some months ago, on the night of my winter ball, His Grace asked me for something in writing, and I wrote it out for him, thinking him merely odd, and I kept the fellow to it. Dated in my own hand. Hear what it says." She unfolded it and read. It says, "The name of the young lady in the grey gown who knelt upon my terrace this evening to mend the torn livery of my old footman, that he might not be turned away for shabbiness. Her name, when you have it, to me. And it is dated, my friends, the night of the winter ball, a full hour before Mrs. Sowerby brought her niece into the light and bade you all laugh at her gown. The room went very still. An hour before, said Lady Thorne, into that stillness, letting it land. The Duke had already seen her, already asked her name, already been struck by a kindness done to a servant in a dark corner where no great man was meant to be watching. How then did this girl arrange a mockery to catch his pity when he had chosen to know her before the mockery was ever staged? The letter says she contrived the terrace. The Duke's own note, dated and witnessed, says he saw the terrace unarranged, by accident, and it moved him. Both cannot be true. One is a forgery. She turned, slowly, and her stick came up, and it pointed. And I can tell you the hand that forged it. You can tell nothing, Mrs., Sowerby said, but her voice had cracked. I can tell a great deal, said Lady Thorne. I have in my reticule 7 sheets of paper. They were got this afternoon from the grate and the blotter of your own daughter's writing desk, by a maid who does not love you, madam, and who was glad of a guinea. And on these 7 sheets is the hand of Miss Honora Blake, practiced over and over, the leaning line, the closed R, the loop G, copied and copied until it could be copied clean. Practiced, my friends, by someone who is not Miss Blake. Shall I read the top of one? It says, in a larger, idler hand between the copied lines, I cannot make the H come right, and below it, the H, again and again, until it comes right. She held the sheets high and turned them so the near rows could see. Here is the forgery being learned. Whose desk, Lady Harrow, did the maid take these from? Miss Arabella Sowerby's, said Lady Harrow. Every eye went to Arabella, who had gone the color of her white gown, and who did the thing that finished it, which was to look, wild and terrified, at her mother, that one glance of a guilty child seeking a guilty parent, and the whole county saw it and understood it. Then, at last, the Duke of Renfield moved. He crossed the golden floor as he had crossed it once before, through the fine people as though they were furniture, and he came to Honora, and he turned to face the room with her. Not in front of her, but beside her, and when he spoke his quiet voice filled the rooms to the cornices. I will say this once, and then I will say nothing further to any of you on the subject for the rest of my life. That letter is a forgery. My great aunt has shown you the hand that made it, and Lady Harrow has shown you the note that disproves its every word, dated before the crime it invents. Miss Blake arranged nothing. I saw her, unseen, kneel in the cold to mend an old man's coat so that he would keep his place, and I asked her name before she knew I was alive, and I have spent this season learning that the woman is exactly what that single act promised she would be, and more. He looked once at Mrs. Sowerby and at Arabella, and his voice did not rise and was the colder for it. You brought her to this town to carry a shawl. You staged her shame for sport, and when the shame turned to honor, you forged a felony to take it back. You will not succeed. From tonight, neither of you is received in any house that regards mine, and I regard a great many. Your invitations are withdrawn. Your daughter's betrothal, Lord Ashwell, I think you will wish to reconsider. A man does not want a forger's practiced hand keeping his accounts. Lord Ashwell had already stepped a careful yard away from Arabella. As for Mrs. Peel, the Duke went on, who sold her name to read a lie aloud, she may keep her fee and lose her trade. No one in this room will use her again. He turned from them then, wholly, as one turns from a thing finished, and he faced Honora, and the whole blazing county held its breath to watch a duke look at a poor relation in a mended gown. I told you once, he said, low now, for her though the room strained to hear it, that I would not ask you my question until you would believe the answer. You asked me why I chose you before all these people, that first night. I will tell you now. I chose you because I had already seen who you were when you did not know you were seen. And a man who has spent 6 years among people who are one thing in the light and another in the dark would crawl the length of England for one person who is the same in both. I did not choose you to pity you. I have never once pitied you. I chose you because I saw you, and I have not been able to unsee you since, and I do not wish to. He took her hand, there before them all, and did not bow over it this time, but held it. Miss Honora Blake. I am asking. And Honora, who had kept every account and folded her hands over every hurt and never once let them see what it cost her, let them see now, and it was not grief, and she said, yes, my answer is yes. And I believe it. There was no scene at an altar to tell of, for the great moment of Honora's life had already happened, in a blazing room before the county, and everything after it was only the quiet business of a life being arranged rightly at last. But there were small things worth the telling, in the days between. There was the ride home from the assembly, in Lady Thorne's own carriage. Because Honora would not be going back to her aunt's house, and everyone in the vehicle knew it. The old woman sat with her stick between her knees and looked pleased as a cat. "You did well," she told Honora. "You did not weep when it would have been easy, and you did not gloat when you had earned the right. There are duchesses of 40 years standing who never learned either trick." "I do not know how to thank you, my lady," Honora said. "You brought the sheets. You saved me." "I brought the sheets," Lady Thorne agreed. "But he saved you, and you saved him a good deal earlier, on a terrace, with a needle, when you thought no one was looking. I only carried the paper. And do not thank me too warmly, child. I am gaining a great niece who keeps accounts and tells the truth, and at my age that is worth more than gratitude." "Julian, aunt," said the Duke, across the dark of the carriage, "do not be slow about it. I should like to see the thing settled while I am still above ground to enjoy it." "I do not mean to be slow," the Duke said, and Honora felt rather than saw him smile. "I have been 6 years slow. I find I have used up my slowness." There was, too, the matter of the house on Eldermere's books, which Honora had kept from ruin 3 winters running, and which she would not simply abandon out of spite, though every soul in it had used her ill. "The house did not laugh at me," she told the Duke, when he asked why she troubled herself over it. "The house sheltered me when I was orphaned, before my aunt learned to grudge it. I will not let it be sold over the servants' heads because its mistress is a fool. Barnaby is not the only old man who would be turned out into the cold." "Barnaby," the Duke said. "The footman, the very one. I have written him a place in your household, your grace, if you will have him. He is too old to be turned off and too proud to beg, and he mended nothing wrong. The rail tore his coat. Not his character. You are arranging my household before you are its mistress," said the Duke, and he was laughing now, quietly, the laugh his great-aunt said had gone out of him for 6 years. "Yes, have him. Have anyone you like. I begin to think the house will run better than it has since my mother's day, and by the same means. And what means are those? Someone in it who sees the people no one troubles to see," he said, and did not laugh at that, and Honora looked out at the dark and kept the words, as she kept all things worth keeping. They were married quietly, out of the county's sight, which pleased them both, for they had had enough of being watched to last 2 lifetimes. And a year passed, and then the thing happened that this story has been walking toward all along, though not the thing you might expect. The Duke of Renfield, who had not opened a ball in 7 years, gave one. It was held at Renfield House, every window gold, the cold rooms of the grieving years warm at last and full of light, and the smell of hothouse flowers. And the whole county came, because one does not refuse a duke, and because they were curious, and because a story that has run for a year in whispers, once an ending its tellers can see with their own eyes. The Duchess of Renfield opened the ball. She came down the great stair in a gown that was the talk of the season after, pale silver silk, beautifully cut, made by the best hands in London, everything the grey gown had never been. And yet, those who stood near enough, and many contrived to, saw that at the wrist of one sleeve, where a lady's hand rests when a gentleman leads her out, there ran a single seam of the finest mending, deliberate, exquisite, a small pale line of stitches that no accident had put there, and no fashion required, set into the silver silk the way a jeweler sets a stone. "Your Grace," said a bold young lady, unable to bear it, "forgive me, but your sleeve. Is it mended?" "It is," said the Duchess of Renfield, and smiled, and turned her wrist a little so the candlelight caught the seam. "I asked for it particularly. A mended thing is a thing that has been cared for. I should not like to forget it, and I should not like anyone here to forget it either." And she said it kindly, without a grain of malice, and it was the most complete triumph the county had ever witnessed, and everyone understood it. And no one dared laugh, and this time the failure to laugh was made of respect. The Duke came and bowed to her, a full bow, the bow a man gives the highest lady in the room, which she now was, and held out his gloved hand. "Your Grace," he said, "will you give me the first dance?" "I will," she said, and put her hand into his, freely, as she had chosen to do once before when she understood nothing, and did now. They danced, and Lady Thorne watched from a gilt chair, alive still and fierce still and insufferably pleased, and Barnaby stood by the wall in a livery with no tears in it, straight-backed and shining, and here and there about the bright room the servants of the house had found small reasons to be near the doors, because they had heard she was the sort of mistress who saw them, and they wished to see her. Of the others there is little to tell, which is as it should be, for a story that ends on the good people is a better story than one that lingers on the bad. Mrs. Sowerby was received nowhere that mattered, and Eldermere, which Honora had saved 3 times, was sold at last when there was no one honest left to keep its books. And the aunt went to live in a smaller place in a duller town and complained of it to anyone who would listen, which in time was no one. Arabella married a man who had not heard the story and learned it within the year, and it did not make her cruel husband kinder, and she who had been the beautiful one grew, they said, hard about the mouth before she was 25. Mrs. Peel left off matchmaking and was not missed. None of them were punished by any hand of Honora's, for she never lifted one against them. They were only left to be exactly what they were, which is the heaviest sentence such people can serve. And the Duke and Duchess of Renfield lived as people live who have been seen truly, once, in a dark corner, and chosen for it in the light. There was, before long, a child with his fair hair and her steady eyes, and the great house that had been cold for 6 years was warm the whole year round, and the woman who had come to town to hold a shawl was mistress of it all, and kept its accounts herself, and knew the name of every soul who served her. That is the whole of it, or the whole worth telling. If you've made it this far into Honora's story, then perhaps some part of it has stayed with you, the way certain small kindnesses stay, and I hope it sends you gently into your evening. Tell me, before you go, which city are you listening from tonight? And if you had stood in that blazing room, would you have been one of the fine ladies who laughed at the mended gown, or one of the quiet souls who saw the woman inside it? Leave your answer below, and stay a while. The fire is warm, and there is another story waiting for tomorrow's dark. Sleep well, and be kind to the ones no one else troubles to see.